At 15 years old, I was shoved out of my own front door into a freezing October storm with nothing but a school backpack and soaking wet sneakers. No coat, no phone, no money. My father's last words to me were simple and devastating. Get out of my house. I don't need a sick daughter. By then, it was already too late. Welcome to my channel. My channel name is The Revenge Room. My name is Shur, and I'm 28 years old now, sitting in my Boston apartment watching rain streak down the harbor view windows. There's a letter on my kitchen table, shaky handwriting on cheap nursing home stationery. After 13 years of silence, my father wants to see me, says he's dying, says he's sorry. Funny thing about rain, it always drags me back to that night, October 14th, 2011. A Tuesday that started like every other Tuesday and ended with me unconscious on the side of Route 9 with early-stage hypothermia, while the person who destroyed my life stood in our living room looking devastated and perfectly innocent. Let me take you back, because to understand what happened that night, you need to understand what was built in the years before it. My mother, Patricia, died in 2006 from cancer. I was 10. My sister Karen was 14. One day, we had a mom who made Sunday pancakes and braided my hair for school pictures. The next day, we were standing beside a hospital bed, listening to machines flatline. My father collapsed inward after that, the kind of grief that hollows a person out and leaves just a shell in a recliner. He went to work, he came home, he stared at nothing. The house could have burned down around him, and I'm not sure he would have noticed the smoke. So, Karen stepped up. At 14, she became the one who cooked dinner, signed permission slips, and made sure I got to school on time. And my father praised her for it constantly. "What would I do without you, Karen? You're so grown up, Karen. You're the glue holding this family together." He never once asked how she was handling her own grief. He just handed her the weight and called it a compliment. What nobody saw, what my father absolutely refused to see, was what Karen was building in the background. Because she wasn't just stepping up, she was constructing a kingdom, and in her kingdom, I was the peasant who needed to be kept in her place. It started small. Homework that mysteriously disappeared the night before it was due, field trip permission slips that never reached my teachers, birthday party invitations I sent that my friends never received. She would visit my teachers with this perfectly practiced sad expression and explain that I was struggling after our mother's death, that I was acting out at home, that they should be patient with me. She was building a portrait of a troubled child, brick by brick, and I didn't even know the portrait existed. When I finally tried to tell my father, sat him down and explained that Karen was sabotaging me and lying about me to everyone, he looked at me like I'd suggested the sky was green. "You're just jealous of your sister. She's trying to help this family. You should be grateful." After that, I learned to keep my mouth shut, stay small, stay quiet, survive until I could get out. What would you have done in that situation? Let me know in the comments, because what came next was something I never could have prepared for. 2 years after my mother died, my father remarried. Jolene was pleasant enough, always smiling, always making casseroles. Karen immediately started calling her mom, strategically, I think, a way to cement her position as the loyal daughter. I couldn't do it. My real mother had only been gone 2 years, and my heart wasn't ready. That quiet refusal cost me everything. From that day forward, Jolene treated me like a stranger in my own home, and she and Karen formed their own quiet alliance. By the time I was 15, the battle lines were drawn so deep I'd stopped seeing them as lines at all. They were just the walls of the cage I lived in. Then there was the money, and this is where everything gets truly sinister. My mother had set up trust funds for both of us before she died, $45,000 each, accessible at 18. A gift from a mother who knew she wouldn't be there to help us start our adult lives. Karen got her share in 2009 and burned through it in 11 months. A sports car, designer clothes, expensive gifts for her boyfriend, Trent, a smooth-talking man with big ideas and absolutely no legitimate income. By the time I was kicked out, Karen was flat broke and Trent was always talking about his next big opportunity. My $45,000 was sitting untouched, waiting for my 18th birthday in 2014, unless something happened to me first, and someone had been doing the math. Here's what Karen and Trent figured out. My mother's trust had a protection clause buried in the legal language, the kind of detail most people would never think to look for. If either daughter was declared legally incompetent or institutionalized before age 21, her share would be managed by a court-appointed family guardian until she recovered. Someone responsible, someone trustworthy, someone like a deeply concerned older sister who only wanted what was best for her troubled little sibling. $45,000. That's what I was worth to Karen. That's the price she put on her own flesh and blood, and she didn't lose a single night of sleep over it. The week before she destroyed my life, Karen put her plan into motion with the kind of cold precision that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. She knew our father's ATM PIN because she handled all the household finances, another reward for being the responsible one. She began making small cash withdrawals, keeping them quiet, keeping them clean. Trent contributed empty prescription bottles from his own anxiety medication, filled at a pharmacy on Oak Street. A prepaid burner phone was purchased at a convenience store 2 blocks from Karen's gym. She loaded it with fake text messages designed to look like conversations with a drug dealer. Then, on the morning of October 14th, while I sat at the kitchen table eating breakfast and mentally reviewing an algebra test, Karen slipped into my bedroom and planted everything. Cash stuffed into my dresser drawer, pill bottles hidden in my closet, the burner phone number written on a slip of paper as proof of my criminal connections. By the time I walked through the front door after school, my trial was already over. I just didn't know it yet. My father was standing in the living room when I arrived, and I knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. His face was the color of raw meat. His hands were shaking. He was holding a wad of cash in one fist and empty pill bottles in the other. Karen stood just behind him, wearing an expression of such exquisite, heartbroken concern that it should have won an Oscar. But I caught her eyes for just a fraction of a second before she composed herself completely. There was something else in there. Satisfaction. Our stepmother, Jolene, hovered in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, lips pressed together, saying absolutely nothing. That was always her specialty, saying nothing while bad things happened. My father didn't let me put down my backpack. He started screaming before I could speak. I had been stealing from his wallet for months. I had been buying pills. I had been hiding evidence of my drug habit in my room. Karen had found everything, and she had come to him in tears because she just couldn't watch her little sister destroy herself anymore. I tried to explain, tried to tell him I had never touched his wallet, never seen those pills, had no idea what he was talking about. But the words died in my throat because I realized something terrible. He wasn't listening. He wasn't even looking at me. His mind was made up before I ever walked through the door. Karen had spent 9 years making herself unimpeachable and painting me as the problem, and in that moment, all that groundwork paid off perfectly. He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises that would still be visible at the hospital 3 hours later. He picked up my backpack and threw it at my chest so hard I stumbled backward. Then he opened the front door. Rain was already coming down in sheets. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since morning, and my father looked me dead in the eyes and said it again. "Get out of my house. I don't need a sick daughter." He shoved me onto the porch. The door slammed, the deadbolt clicked, and just like that, at 15 years old, I was homeless. Where are you watching this from right now? Because I want you to picture yourself at 15, standing on that porch, soaking wet before you even hit the sidewalk, with nowhere to go and no way to call for help. I stood frozen on that porch for maybe 5 minutes, completely unable to process what had just happened. I kept waiting for the door to open again, kept waiting for someone to say it was a misunderstanding. Nobody came. My phone was sitting on my bedroom desk. I hadn't been allowed to grab anything except what was already in my hands. My backpack contained textbooks, a half-eaten granola bar, and 0 survival tools. No jacket, no money, no way to reach anyone. So I started walking. My body just moved on autopilot towards the only safe place I could think of. My grandmother Dorothy's house, 7 miles away. My mom's mom, the one person in the world who had always looked at me like I genuinely mattered. 7 miles sounds manageable until you're walking it in canvas sneakers through a freezing October downpour with no coat. After the first mile, my clothes were soaked through to my skin. After the second mile, my fingers were numb. After the third mile, my teeth were shattering so hard I was genuinely afraid they'd crack. Cars splashed past on Route 9 without slowing down. I was just a shadow on the roadside that nobody wanted to look at too closely. The thing about hypothermia is it deceives you. Your body starts shutting down piece by piece, and your brain gets foggy, and suddenly sitting down for just a minute seems like the most reasonable idea in the world. I made it 4 miles before my legs gave out. I remember seeing a mailbox up ahead and thinking I'd just lean against it for a second. My knees buckled before I got there. The gravel came fast. Then everything went dark. 3 hours after throwing his daughter into a storm, my father's phone rang. The voice on the other end was cold and professional. Officer Daniels, County Police. His daughter had been found unconscious on Route 9, hypothermia. She was being transported to County General. And one more thing, sir. Child Protective Services had already been notified, a caseworker was already on site, and they had some very specific questions about why a 15-year-old girl was walking alone in dangerous weather with no coat and no phone. My father's face went white as bone. But here's the part he didn't know yet. The woman who found me unconscious on that roadside wasn't just some random stranger driving home from errands. And that single coincidence was about to unravel everything Karen had so carefully constructed. Her name was Gloria Hensley, and she was 67 years old, retired after 35 years working for Child Protective Services. She had seen every kind of abuse, every kind of neglect, every variety of cruelty that adults could inflict on children. She knew exactly what she was looking at when her headlights caught a teenage girl collapsed on the roadside in the rain. She pulled over so fast her tires screamed against the wet pavement. She had an emergency blanket in her trunk, old habits from her CPS days, and she wrapped me up and called 911 before I even regained consciousness. She followed the ambulance to the hospital. She stayed while the doctors worked. And when I opened my eyes 4 hours later to fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic, Gloria Hensley was sitting beside my bed with a paperback novel closed in her lap and those sharp, cataloging eyes watching me carefully. She handed me a cup of hospital cafeteria coffee. "This is terrible," she said, "but it's warm." I actually laughed. For the first time in hours, maybe days, something inside me loosened just slightly. She smiled back with this knowing, gentle expression that told me she already understood far more than I realized. "Now," she said quietly, "why don't you tell me why a 15-year-old was walking alone on Route 9 in a storm with no coat and no phone?" So I told her everything, the accusations, the planted evidence, the years of Karen's quiet, methodical destruction of my reputation inside our own home. I told her things I had never told anyone, because no one had ever actually sat still and listened without already having decided what they believed. Gloria didn't interrupt, didn't look skeptical, didn't offer me the polite, pitying smile of someone simply waiting for their turn to speak. She just listened, with the focused patience of someone who had spent 3 decades separating truth from carefully constructed lies. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, her eyes steady and unreadable. Then she said 7 words that changed the entire trajectory of my life. "I believe you, and I'm going to help you prove it." Think about what it means to hear those words after years of being dismissed, disbelieved, and painted as the problem. Think about what that single sentence does to a person who has almost forgotten what it feels like to be believed. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had someone stand up for you when nobody else would, because those people are rarer than gold and twice as valuable. While I was unconscious, the machinery of consequence had already begun turning.
police had contacted my father. CPS had dispatched a caseworker named Maria Santos, a 30-year veteran with a finely tuned radar for deception and absolutely no tolerance for unanswered questions. And my grandmother, Dorothy, had been reached by phone. Dorothy Reeves was 67 years old, 5 foot 2 inches of pure, focused determination, and she was absolutely not in the mood for anyone's nonsense that night. My mother was her only daughter. I was her only grandchild. She had never trusted my father or his new family, and the phone call she received confirmed every instinct she had ever quietly suppressed out of politeness. She lived 40 minutes from the hospital. She made it in 25. I heard her before I saw her, that distinctive click of sensible heels moving down a hospital corridor at a pace that communicated serious, non-negotiable business. She swept into my room like a small, silver-haired hurricane and immediately positioned herself between me and the door. When my father and Karen arrived at 10:15 that night, expecting to find a scared, apologetic girl ready to confess and beg to come home, they found something else entirely. They found a room containing me, Gloria Hensley, Maria Santos, a uniformed police officer, and my grandmother, Dorothy, who looked at my father the way a judge looks at someone she has already decided is guilty and is simply waiting for the formality of the verdict. Karen's mask slipped the moment she walked in, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough for every trained professional eye in that room to register it clearly. Karen tried to run her usual script. Concerned older sister, troubled younger sibling. We just want what's best for her. Maria Santos let her finish and then began asking questions that had no comfortable answers. My father tried to justify himself, started talking about the cash, the pills, the evidence Karen had presented. Dorothy listened for approximately 30 seconds before raising one hand with the quiet authority of someone who has never once in her life needed to raise her voice to command a room. "Raymond," she said, "I've known you for 15 years and you have never been the sharpest tool in the shed, but this might be your single dumbest moment yet. You threw a child into a storm based on what? Pills that appeared from nowhere? Cash that magically materialized in a drawer? Did you even once ask her for her side of the story?" He opened his mouth, closed it again. Dorothy nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I thought." By 12:30 that morning, I had a new home. A family court judge granted emergency temporary guardianship to Dorothy Reeves effective immediately. My father was ordered to have no contact with me until a full investigation was completed. CPS would be interviewing everyone, me, Karen, my father, and Jolene, and they would be examining every piece of so-called evidence very, very carefully. Maria Santos was not a caseworker who simply checked boxes and moved files from one pile to another. She was methodical, relentless, and genuinely dangerous to anyone with something to hide. She started with the cash, the $800 found in my dresser drawer that my father claimed proved months of systematic theft. She pulled the bank records. That $800 came from a single ATM withdrawal made on October 14th, the very same day I was expelled from my home. The bank provided surveillance footage. Timestamp 2:47 p.m. The person on camera was not me. It was Karen. Same jacket from that morning, same ponytail, and visible in the background, her white sedan with the distinctive dent in the rear bumper. At 2:47 p.m., I was sitting in 5th period chemistry class. Attendance records confirmed it. My teacher remembered me specifically. I could not have made that withdrawal. It was physically, geographically, completely impossible. And that was just the first thread Maria Santos pulled. The whole sweater was about to unravel.
When you build a lie on top of a lie on top of a lie, you need a perfect memory and flawless execution at every single level. Karen had neither. The pill bottles planted in my closet were traced back to a prescription belonging to Trent Barlow, Karen's boyfriend, the man with all the big investment ideas and zero legitimate income. Maria Santos contacted the pharmacy on Oak Street. Interesting finding. Trent had reported those exact pills stolen, filed a police report claiming someone had broken into his car and taken them. Very conscientious, concerned citizen behavior. Except he filed that report on October 17th, 3 full days after I was kicked out into that storm. If those pills were already hidden in my closet on October 14th, why did Trent wait 72 hours to report them missing? The answer was brutally simple. They were never stolen. Karen took them deliberately, planted them in my room, and then Trent filed the theft report afterward to create a paper trail and justify getting a refill prescription. The delayed report wasn't just suspicious, it was a neon sign flashing above their heads that read, "We planned this together, we are not as smart as we believed, and we left a trail a first-year investigator could follow in the dark." The burner phone sealed it. The prepaid phone used to generate the fake drug dealer text messages had been purchased at a convenience store on October 10th, 4 days before everything happened. This wasn't a spontaneous reaction to discovering her sister's supposed drug problem. This was a calendar. This was a scheduled demolition. Maria Santos tracked down the store and pulled their security footage. The buyer was a young woman, brown hair in a ponytail, athletic build, who paid cash and clearly believed that cash meant invisible. But her car was sitting right there in the parking lot, visible through the store window behind her. White sedan, dented rear bumper. The same car Karen drove every single day. 3 separate cameras, 3 separate locations, one woman connecting every dot directly back to herself. What would you do if you found out your own sibling had constructed something this calculated against you? Drop your answer in the comments because I genuinely want to know. But here is where the story stopped being about one terrible night and became something much larger and much uglier. As Maria Santos continued pulling threads, she started examining the household finances more broadly. Specifically, she looked at checks written on my father's account over the previous 2 years. What she found made the $800 look like loose change forgotten in a coat pocket. Someone had been forging checks in my father's name for nearly 2 years. Small amounts at first, $50 here, $100 there, carefully sized to avoid triggering suspicion, but they accumulated. The forged signatures were close, practiced, but not quite right under professional examination. The money flowed into accounts connected to Trent Barlow and his rotating collection of business ventures and investment schemes. Total amount stolen from my father's own account by his beloved, trusted, responsible eldest daughter, just under $18,000. Karen hadn't just framed me to steal my trust fund, she had been robbing our father blind for 2 years, and she needed me gone, discredited, and institutionalized before he looked closely enough at his own finances to notice the hemorrhage. My grandmother Dorothy hired Leonard Vance, an old family friend who had practiced family law for 30 years and had known my mother since grade school. When Dorothy explained the full scope of what had happened, his face went hard in a way that made me profoundly grateful he was sitting on our side of the table. Leonard filed for permanent guardianship immediately. He filed a civil suit against Karen for fraud, emotional distress, and everything else he could legally make stick. He ensured my trust fund was locked down with additional court oversight so that nobody could touch a single dollar until I turned 18. And then the universe, which had seemed entirely indifferent to my existence for most of my life, delivered something unexpected directly into Leonard's hands. 1 month before the scheduled court hearing, Trent Barlow was arrested in Nevada. Federal marshals picked him up for running the same investment fraud scheme across 3 different states, stealing over $400,000 from victims who had trusted them with their life savings. He was facing potentially 15 years in federal prison. His lawyer made a phone call the following morning. Trent was ready to cooperate, ready to make a deal, ready to tell the truth about everything, including his girlfriend Karen and exactly what she did to her 15-year-old sister. The walls were closing in, and Trent Barlow, who had never been loyal to anything except his own survival, chose himself without a moment of hesitation.
His written statement ran 12 pages. He confirmed that the plan to frame me was Karen's idea from the very beginning. She had been stealing from our father for nearly 2 years, and the theft was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. She needed a scapegoat, someone already painted as troubled, someone nobody would instinctively defend. She told Trent that getting me institutionalized for substance abuse would solve both problems simultaneously. She would have someone to blame for the missing money, and as my court-appointed guardian, she would gain control of my $45,000 trust fund while I sat in a facility, medicated and discredited and completely powerless. Trent documented the planning sessions in detail, the pill bottles he provided, the burner phone Karen purchased, the morning she slipped into my bedroom while I ate breakfast downstairs, and planted every piece of evidence with her own hands. He included text messages between them from the days leading up to October 14th, messages that proved beyond any possible doubt that this was not impulsive or emotional, it was cold, it was calculated, it was premeditated down to the timestamp on a bank withdrawal. His final line stayed with me long after I stopped needing it to. Karen said her sister was a nobody who wouldn't fight back. She was wrong. March 2012. Family court. I had been living with Grandma Dorothy for 5 months. I had gained weight, the good kind, the kind that comes from regular meals and actual sleep and not spending every day braced for the next attack. I had made honor roll at my new school. I had started remembering what it felt like to simply be a teenager. But walking into that courtroom, I felt 15 again, small and scared, and quietly terrified that somehow, even now, even with it all, nobody would believe me. Dorothy squeezed my hand, Leonard nodded, and Gloria Hensley was there in the gallery, same reading glasses, same fierce expression, the woman who stopped her car on a dark road because a shadow on the roadside mattered to her. I took a breath and walked in.
The hearing was supposed to be a straightforward guardianship formality, making Dorothy's temporary custody permanent, establishing support obligations, closing the file neatly and moving on. Instead, it became something else entirely because the district attorney had gotten involved, and with Trent's confession and the mountain of evidence Maria Santos had spent 5 months assembling with meticulous, unrelenting precision, this was no longer just a family court matter. There were criminal charges on the table, and every single person in that courtroom knew exactly what that meant. Karen sat on the other side of the room with a public defender she had met approximately 1 hour before proceedings began. She looked smaller than I remembered, paler. The confident, controlled golden child who had managed our household like a personal chessboard for nearly a decade now looked like exactly what she was, a scared young woman whose carefully constructed world had finally, completely, and very publicly collapsed beneath her feet. Our father sat alone in the gallery. Jolene had refused to come. He looked like he had aged a full decade in 5 months, gray and hollowed out, a man slowly and painfully comprehending the true weight of what his willful blindness had cost everyone around him, including himself. The evidence was presented systematically, professionally, and with a devastation that built steadily with every new exhibit. ATM footage showing Karen making the withdrawal at 2:47 p.m., my school attendance records proving I was sitting in chemistry class at that exact moment, 12 miles away, surrounded by 30 witnesses and an electronic check-in system. Pharmacy records exposing Trent's suspiciously delayed theft report filed 3 days after the fact. Security footage from the convenience store showing Karen purchasing the burner phone 4 full days before she dismantled my life. 2 years of forged checks totaling $18,000 drained quietly from her own father's account. And then Trent's written confession, read into the record word by deliberate word, filling the courtroom with the specific kind of silence that only settles over a room when people are hearing something they cannot quite believe and yet cannot look away from. When Karen took the stand and attempted to maintain her story one final time, the prosecutor showed her the ATM photograph. Clear, time-stamped, completely undeniable. "Is this you at First National Bank on October 14th at 2:47 p.m.? Karen swallowed visibly.
I was getting money for groceries." The prosecutor nodded with the slow patience of someone who has already won and knows it. $800 in cash for groceries. And you didn't mention this withdrawal to your father when you accused your sister of stealing that exact amount later that same afternoon? Silence. Can you explain how your sister made this withdrawal while attendance records confirm she was sitting in chemistry class at this precise moment? More silence. The evidence was the evidence. Facts have never once in the history of the world cared about anyone's feelings or their carefully rehearsed explanations. Then they called Jolene. My stepmother looked like she genuinely wished she could dissolve through the courtroom floor and reappear somewhere warmer and far less consequential. She had spent years mastering the art of strategic neutrality, of being physically present without being morally responsible, of watching damaging things unfold without technically participating in them. But this was a courtroom, and she was under oath, and neutrality was no longer an available option for her to hide behind. The prosecutor asked about the morning of October 14th. Had she noticed anything unusual? Jolene's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Karen had gone into my room around 7 a.m., said she was borrowing a hair tie. Did she come out with one? No, she came out empty-handed. And had Jolene noticed anything else in the days immediately prior? She closed her eyes like someone bracing for the impact of their own words. 2 days before everything happened, she had overheard Karen on the phone with Trent. She said, "Everything is in place," and then she laughed. The courtroom went absolutely and completely still. That single sentence, delivered in a near whisper by a woman who had chosen silence for years as her primary survival strategy, was the last nail driven cleanly and permanently into place. Some people spend their whole lives avoiding the moment of reckoning. Jolene's caught up with her in a family courtroom in March, under fluorescent lights, with a court reporter capturing every syllable. When our father took the stand, I felt something approaching pity. Almost. He had to sit before a judge and explain out loud, on the permanent record, why he expelled his 15-year-old daughter into a dangerous storm without conducting a single moment of independent investigation. Had to admit he never personally checked the bank records, never questioned why the evidence had appeared so suddenly and so conveniently. Never once asked for my side before making his decision and locking that deadbolt. His voice cracked when he said, I trusted her. She was always the responsible one." Judge Patricia Morrison had spent 30 years watching families destroy each other in endlessly creative and devastating ways, but even she looked genuinely disturbed by the full picture she had heard. Her words landed with quiet, surgical precision. "Mr. Walls, trust is not an excuse for negligence. You expelled a minor child into dangerous conditions based entirely on unverified accusations. You chose one daughter over another without evidence, without investigation, without basic parental judgment. That is not parenting. That is abandonment." She paused to let it settle before continuing. "Your older daughter engaged in a calculated, premeditated scheme to destroy your sister's life for financial gain. She stole from you, manipulated you, and turned you into an unwitting instrument of her cruelty, and you permitted it because it was easier to believe the daughter who made you feel capable than to parent the daughter who actually needed you." Karen's consequences arrived hard and permanent: fraud, theft, filing false statements to law enforcement, child endangerment. A plea deal kept her out of prison: 2 years suspended sentence, 5 years supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, full restitution of every stolen dollar, $18,000 from our father's account, $800 she had planted to frame me. And the consequence that no negotiation could soften or eventually expunge: a felony conviction permanently attached to her name. No finance jobs, no positions of monetary trust, no working with children or vulnerable adults. The golden child had a permanent record now, and it was never, under any circumstances, coming off. My father lost all guardianship rights permanently and was ordered to fund my therapy and educational expenses until I turned 21. Permanent guardianship was granted to Dorothy Reeves, effective immediately. When we walked out of that courthouse into warm March sunshine, my father tried one final time to approach me. Dorothy stepped between us without slowing her pace by a single step. "You don't get to call her that anymore," she said with absolute quiet certainty. "You had your chance to be her father, and you threw it away. Literally." We kept walking. I did not look back once. 13 years later, I'm 28, living in Boston with harbor views and morning light I chose entirely for myself. Marketing director, engaged to Colin, a pediatric nurse who spilled wine on my dress the night we met, apologized for 10 straight minutes, and then made me laugh so hard the apology became irrelevant. We are getting married in the spring at Dorothy's house, small and warm and exactly right, with meatloaf firmly on the menu, because some things are sacred. When my father's letter arrived from the nursing home, I drove to Dorothy's, read it at her kitchen table, and made my decision. I went. Not for him, for me. I told him I forgave him, and I explained precisely what that meant. It did not mean forgetting. It meant I was done carrying weight that was never mine to carry. I built my entire life without him, and I built it well, and he needed to live what he did, because that burden belonged to him now, not me. Walking out of that nursing home into October sunshine, same month, entirely different life, I felt something shift permanently in my chest. Not relief exactly, completion. The last page of a very long book finally turning. I drove back to Boston, to Colin and cold takeout and a bad movie, and that patient look he gets when he knows I need quiet time to land. "I think I'm finally done," I told him. "I think I can let it go now." He held me and asked nothing further. That is one of 1,000 reasons I'm marrying him. Some storms do not destroy you. They redirect you entirely. That October night, I lost a house but found my home. I lost a father who didn't deserve me, and I finally, completely found a grandmother who did. I lost a sister who never loved me, and I finally, completely found myself. Thank you so much for staying until the very end. If this story moved you at all, please give it a like and subscribe to The Revenge Room so you never miss what comes next. I will see you in the next one.